They say the worst kind of heartbreak isn't the one that breaks you down in public, it's the kind that forces you to smile while your soul caves in behind your eyes. That's the kind I felt the moment my husband slapped my hand away at his brother's wedding, right as I reached for his fingers under the candlelit reception table. In front of the guests, the glittering guests, the string quartet, and the two white centerpieces, he didn't even look at me. He just murmured through a clenched smile, "Don't embarrass me, you're just a baby carrier." I wish I could say I stood up. I wish I could say I screamed. But I didn't. I laughed. Just enough to make it seem like he'd said something mildly inappropriate, like a naughty joke between newlyweds instead of the sentence that shattered the last illusion I had about the man I married. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap like I was calm, like I was gracious, like I didn't just have my dignity gutted in front of 100 people. And the worst part? No one noticed. Not his mother, who sat 2 seats away beaming with performative pride. Not his brother, who was too busy playing groom of the hour to care that his sibling just humiliated his wife. Not even the photographer, who caught me in a frozen smile that I would later see framed on someone's Instagram feed, captioned, #FamilyGoals. I was the wife. The good wife. The one who kept her mouth shut when his mother compared me to a surrogate more than once during those thinly veiled jokes over family brunch. The one who showed up to every event, pregnant belly forward like a badge of approval, dressed in cream and gold and lipstick that matched the flowers in my hair. I was the background player in his life, propping him up while he played golden boy. And now, seated beside the man who once whispered promises into my hair and now wouldn't even touch my skin, I was also his accessory. His vessel. His so-called baby carrier. You'd think that kind of betrayal would start with something big, like an affair, a confession, or a discovery. But mine started with a napkin, folded too tightly in my lap, and 1,000 blinking fairy lights strung over tables that cost more than my wedding dress. His brother, Colton, was marrying one of those women who looked like she was born in filtered light. Samantha, with her perfect teeth and her pin-straight hair that didn't move even when the wind picked up around the lake. She was the kind of bride magazines wrote headlines about. She also didn't like me. That part was obvious from the moment she made me wear pale pink instead of navy, even though I was 6 months pregnant, and she knew it washed me out. "It's softer," she had said, placing a hand lightly on her chest like we were best friends instead of acquaintances who barely made eye contact. I hadn't wanted to come. Not after the last fight. Not after the names. But showing up was expected of me. That's what I did. I showed up. I played the role. I smiled. But the slap of his hand, the way his voice dropped like I was a stain on his reputation, changed everything. I looked around the table and something inside me clicked. Like a switch that had been waiting for just the right moment to flip. His mother was laughing at a story he was telling that I'd heard before. One of those stories where I had been there too, but somehow I was never part of the punchline. I watched as her fingers grazed his arm, eyes glowing with maternal pride, like she had handcrafted the man he became with delicate lace and ambition. And maybe she had. Maybe she raised him to believe that women were props, not partners. I excused myself politely, stood, and made my way to the edge of the dock outside. I didn't stumble. I didn't cry. I walked with the kind of slow, deliberate grace that made people step aside for me. Let them think it was the baby. Let them think I needed air. Let them think I was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother enjoying a quiet moment under the stars. But the truth? I was calculating. I was reviewing every insult, every micro-cut of disrespect that I had patched over in the name of peace. I was cataloging the silence from his side of the bed. The way he only touched me when he wanted to show off. The way his friends looked at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I knew something they didn't. I knew that people like him, people who weaponized charm and used their family as shields, always underestimated quiet women. Especially ones who smiled through pain. When I went back inside, the speeches had started. His hand was resting lazily on the back of my chair, like nothing had happened. I didn't sit. I touched his shoulder lightly and said, I'm going to check on the car. I think I left something. He nodded without even turning to look at me. The drive home was silent. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat in the passenger seat of our black SUV, hands folded over my belly, while he hummed along to some playlist he had curated for the ride. He didn't notice I didn't speak. He never noticed silence. It always served him. When we got home, I didn't go upstairs. I went to the guest room. I closed the door. I waited until I heard his shower running before I pulled out the envelope I had hidden in the pocket of my coat. Inside were 4 things: a copy of our joint bank account statement, a photograph from 2 months ago taken by a friend of mine, one he didn't know existed, a screenshot of a Venmo transaction labeled, "For the hotel room, winky face," sent to a name I didn't recognize, and a note I had written 2 weeks earlier that simply said, "This isn't a cry for help. It's a declaration of war." I had waited. I had watched. I had collected. Because sometimes, when you know you're seen as nothing more than a container, the only way to win is to remind them that containers can carry more than just babies. They can carry fire. They say your wedding day is the happiest day of your life. I didn't get that kind of day. Mine was held together by nervous smiles, a dress that cost more than 3 months' rent, and the kind of promises that sound beautiful until you realize they were made by a man who treats truth like a performance, just long enough to fool an audience. By the time we got home from Colton and Samantha's wedding, I could feel the humiliation gnawing at the walls of my throat like an animal trying to claw its way out. I walked straight past the kitchen, ignored the hum of the refrigerator, the distant echo of his voice asking if I wanted anything from the leftovers. My fingers gripped the banister a little too tightly as I climbed the stairs, the ache in my calves nothing compared to the sting still burning across the back of my hand where he slapped it away in front of his mother, in front of his brother, in front of the universe. But I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I went into the bathroom. And I cried. Not because I was sad, although sadness was buried in there somewhere, tangled in the wreckage. Not because I was surprised, because honestly, this wasn't even the worst thing he had ever said to me. No, I cried because I finally saw the truth in terrifying clarity. I had become the kind of woman I once swore I would never be. The kind who stayed quiet. The kind who smiled through insults. The kind who said thank you after being treated like a tool. I sat on the closed toilet seat, clutching a hand towel like it might steady my trembling spine. The light above the mirror flickered once, and for a moment, the dim yellow glow made my reflection look almost ghostly, like I was already halfway gone. And maybe I was. Maybe for months now I had been erasing parts of myself just to fit into the shape of his expectations. Laugh smaller. Speak softer. Don't complain. Don't cry. Don't make things awkward. And above all, don't make him look bad. I looked at the swollen veins in my ankles, the bruised outline of the elastic waistband on my maternity leggings, and thought, this is what I gave him. My body, my trust, my identity. And what did he give me back? You're just a baby carrier. That line echoed in my ears again and again until it didn't even sound like English anymore, just syllables strung together by venom and cowardice. But then something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the weight of all the moments I had swallowed whole just to keep the peace. Maybe it was the way my unborn child kicked for the first time at that exact second, as if reminding me that I wasn't alone in this skin, that there was someone else who needed to know their mother wasn't weak. Maybe it was simply the breaking point, the moment the scales tipped too far in the wrong direction, and I decided I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I stood up, hands braced on the edge of the sink, and stared into my own eyes until they stopped shaking. I didn't wipe away the tears. I let them fall. I wanted to see them. I wanted to remember exactly what I looked like the moment I stopped being afraid of him. And then I did something strange. I started reciting my wedding speech, at least, the one I had given last year under a flower arch and a sky too perfect to be real. The one filled with phrases like soulmate, forever, and I knew from the moment I met you. The one that felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone naive. And I rewrote it. Not on paper. Not yet. But in my mind. Word by word. Line by line. I turned the sweetness sour. I replaced the cliches with truth. I built it like a weapon, forged from every insult, every lonely night, every time he made me feel small just so he could feel taller. If I could do it all again, I whispered to the mirror, I would stand there in front of our friends and family and say, this is a man who needs applause more than partnership. This is a man who confuses control with love. This is a man who calls his wife a vessel and expects her to thank him for the privilege. The air in the bathroom shifted. Thicker. Charged. I stepped back and imagined the wedding all over again, but this time, I wasn't the glowing bride. I was the storm. I promise, I continued, my voice steady now, to remember who I am even when you try to erase me. I promise to protect the child I carry not just from the world, but from the version of you that believes love is owed and empathy optional. I promise that I will no longer beg for kindness from someone who trades it like currency. I laughed. Not a pretty laugh. Not a laugh you hear in movies. It was hollow and furious and real. I take you, I said to the air, not as a partner, but as a lesson. I stayed in that bathroom for another 10 minutes, not crying anymore, just breathing in the smell of lavender, soap, and cold tile. And when I finally emerged, I wasn't the same woman who had gone in. Something had hardened. Not in a brittle way, but in the way that steel hardens after fire. He was in bed already, scrolling through his phone, a smirk tugging at the edge of his mouth like he thought everything was back to normal. You okay now? He asked, not looking up. I nodded once. Never better. And I meant it. I lay beside him, facing away, already planning my next move. Because the truth was, the speech wasn't for a wedding anymore. It was for the funeral of a fantasy, the one where I thought this marriage could be saved. And when the moment came to speak it aloud, I'd make damn sure everyone would hear it. When I returned to the venue, the crisp evening air clung to my skin like a warning I didn't need, but welcomed anyway. The fairy lights strung between the trees outside the reception hall flickered like timid stars, trying to compete with the storm I was dragging in behind my heels. I walked slowly, deliberately, not out of exhaustion or indecision, but because I wanted every step to ring like a gavel in the quiet night. No one noticed me at first, which wasn't surprising considering how many times I'd blended into the background of his life without objection. Inside, the music throbbed with that unbearable wedding cheer that tries to mask how many marriages are already cracked before they begin. My husband, no, not my husband, not anymore, not in the way that word was supposed to mean something, stood laughing near the cake table, completely unaware. He was laughing like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just gutted his own wife with a sentence so cruel it should have stopped time. The moment I stepped past the open doors, something inside the room shifted, just a flicker in the air, like a stage sensing its climax. I walked straight past the crowd, past the small talk, past the trays of champagne and empty laughter, until I reached the edge of the stage. The microphone sat in its stand, perfectly centered, like it had been waiting for the right voice to actually say something that mattered. A keyboardist was adjusting settings beside it, his fingers still half on the keys when I stepped up and took the microphone without asking permission. He gave me a curious look, not alarmed, just curious, as though he could sense I wasn't here for a song or a toast. I didn't introduce myself because every person in that room already knew my name, and after this night, they would never forget my voice. My fingers wrapped tightly around the microphone, not because I was afraid, but because I needed to feel something solid as I broke the silence. The music died on cue, or maybe the room just sensed that something real was about to unfold and didn't dare compete with it. Every conversation ceased mid-sentence, every wine glass lowered, every plastic smile faltered as the crowd collectively turned their eyes toward the woman in the soft pink dress. And I began to speak not loudly, but with the kind of measured clarity that slices far deeper than any scream could ever hope to reach. For those of you who know me only by association, allow me to reintroduce myself as something other than a decorative figure in someone else's narrative. I am not just the wife of the groom's brother, not just the polite girl who knows how to wear silence like jewelry. I am the woman who sat quietly for 6 months while her husband dissolved her identity piece by piece with smirks and cruelty. I am the woman who carried his child, not just with her body, but with her hope, her fear, her whole damn future. The air in the room didn't move, it simply thickened, like truth had weight, and everyone could feel how heavy it had suddenly become. I saw my husband's face in the back, his smirk had slipped, replaced by the dawning horror of a man losing control of his favorite illusion. He started walking toward the stage, too fast, like he thought proximity could still stop me, like he forgot who I was before he rewrote me. I raised one hand slightly, just enough to halt him mid-step, my eyes narrowing not with rage, but with that terrifying calm reserved for surgeons and mothers. This evening, while you all were dancing and drinking and congratulating yourselves on knowing good people, I was being reminded that my silence was his shield. He leaned across a white table, surrounded by his family, and told me not to embarrass him because I was just a baby carrier. There were gasps now, real ones, the kind that make you instinctively cover your mouth because the truth feels like watching someone fall and knowing you can't look away. He opened his mouth. I could see it twitching, framing excuses or some desperate revision of the moment, but I spoke louder and faster, refusing interruption. You don't get to control the narrative anymore. Not here, not now, not after everything you've turned into collateral damage for your ego. You see, the moment you said that to me, slapped my hand away like it was some inconvenience, I remembered that I used to have fire. I remembered the girl who used to stand up in debate class and tear people apart with nothing but her voice and her conviction. I remembered that I was never built to shrink, I was only taught to, and that teaching stops right here on this stage tonight. There was an audible shift now. People were standing straighter, leaning forward, the air tight with second-hand reckoning as I dragged my marriage into the open light. You joke about stretch marks, ignore doctor appointments, call emotional support a burden, and yet you parade yourself as a devoted partner at public events. You haven't touched me with tenderness in months, haven't asked about the baby's name, haven't shown up for one single parenting class or appointment. You were supposed to build a life with me, not build a cage where my only job is to be quiet, convenient, and always smiling. He finally reached the edge of the stage and called my name, his voice cracked just slightly, like he knew too late what was already set in motion. But I didn't let him speak. I turned directly toward him and leaned into the microphone with a voice so clear it could have sliced through steel beams. You had your chance to speak with kindness, with partnership, with love. You used that chance to belittle me in public, so now I respond in public. You thought you could humiliate me quietly, but I will burn the script you wrote for me and replace it with truth, whether you approve or not. I could see his mother now, his precious mother who once called me mild-mannered, like it was a compliment, sitting frozen with a wine glass trembling between her fingers. And for every woman here who's ever swallowed pain so as not to ruin the evening, I hope you hear me now and know you are not alone. I was never just a vessel for someone else's dreams. I was the whole damn storm, and tonight, I came back to remember what thunder sounds like. With that, I placed the microphone carefully back on the stand, not with drama, not with showmanship, but with the precision of a woman done being ignored. No one clapped, not because they didn't feel it, but because the weight of truth doesn't ask for applause, it demands silence, and leaves it ringing in your ears. I walked down from that stage slower than I had walked up, because I wanted him to see me, fully, finally, and without apology. He reached for me as I passed, his fingers brushing my arm like they used to hold meaning, but I didn't even flinch or look back. Because when you walk away from someone who never really saw you, what you're really doing is walking toward yourself, and that is something sacred. The wind caught me again as I stepped into the night, but it wasn't cold this time. It felt like permission, like something had finally been broken open. And somewhere beneath my ribs, Our child kicked again, not out of fear or protest, but as if to say, "That's my mother. And I'm proud." I didn't wait for applause when I stepped down from that stage, and I didn't pause to see the fallout behind me either. Some moments don't need validation. Some truths don't echo, they land, permanent and immovable, like a cathedral finally built on ground that no longer shifts beneath your feet. That was what it felt like the second I put the microphone down and turned away. Something ancient inside me solidified. My heels didn't click against the floor anymore. They pounded. I didn't look left or right. I didn't scan faces for understanding or pity or that familiar flicker of discomfort people wear when confronted with reality. The only thing I focused on was the path between me and the coat check. The only voice I listened to was the one in my head saying, "You're done. This chapter is over. This performance has closed, and you don't owe them an encore." I passed by the buffet table, past the floral arrangements, still pretending this was a joyful evening, past Samantha's mother clutching her pearls like I'd burned scripture. I saw Marisa, the bride, frozen mid-sip of sparkling wine, her lips parted in that shocked expression people wear when they realize real life doesn't care about choreography. Even Samantha, the picture-perfect center of today's curated fantasy, didn't move. Her bouquet hung limp at her side, petals slightly wilted, like even they knew what I'd said wasn't scandal, it was prophecy. I made my way to the hallway outside. The music still paused, the silence behind me growing thicker with every step I took. When I reached the coat check, the young girl behind the counter blinked twice before remembering to smile. She was barely 20, maybe, with shaky eyeliner and a name tag that said Lena. I remember her because she didn't flinch, didn't ask questions, didn't avert her eyes. She simply handed me my coat and said, with a voice as steady as mine had been, "That was brave." I nodded, slid the coat over my shoulders as the silk lining whispered against my skin, and said only, "Thank you for holding onto something I still wanted." The doors to the reception opened behind me then. Not forcefully, not loud, but enough that I knew someone had followed. I didn't need to turn to know it was him. There's a specific temperature that enters a room when a man you once trusted decides he's owed your forgiveness. He called my name once, just once, and it was careful, calculated. The way someone speaks to a wild animal they think might still love them. But I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I walked out into the night air, thick with humidity and the scent of lake water and rose petals crushed under heels, and I breathed it in like oxygen I had forgotten how to crave. The valet tried to hand me a claim ticket, but I waved him off and said, "I didn't come for a car. I came to leave." He looked confused, but I didn't give him time to argue. I turned left, then right, my feet leading me to the only place that still felt like mine, that small parking area tucked behind the hill, far from the noise, where I had parked our SUV hours before. My body was aching in that dull, relentless way it always did now, but I welcomed it. Pain meant I still felt something. Pain meant I hadn't turned to stone. When I reached the car, I opened the back door and saw the car seat waiting exactly where I'd left it, buckled and tight, sterile in its security. A reminder that even in my most disrespected moments, I had still done everything right. I had still prepared. I had still shown up for the child he barely acknowledged. The child who kicked now just once, as if they too were saying, "Let's go." I placed my hand over my belly, not with sadness, not with apology, but with reverence. This child didn't belong to a broken marriage. This child didn't come from bitterness or rage. This child came from a woman who, despite it all, still believed in love. Not the performative kind. Not the transactional kind. The kind that says, "I will choose you. I will protect you. I will never let anyone define you by their inability to see your worth." I whispered to them, just once, "We're going to be okay." Then I got in the car, buckled the seatbelt across my stomach, started the engine, and drove. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't play music. I just drove. The road away from the venue stretched long and dark, framed by trees that looked like silhouettes of everything I was leaving behind, expectation, performance, the hunger for approval that had shaped my marriage more than love ever had. And with each mile, I felt lighter, not in body, but in soul. I felt parts of me returning, pieces I hadn't realized I'd lost until they stirred awake inside me like wolves stretching after too many winters of obedience. I didn't go home. Not the shared house. Not the place where our wedding photos still hung on the stairwell like warnings. I went to my sister's apartment, a small third-floor walk-up with bad insulation and the kind of furniture that looks mismatched but feels like sanctuary. She was waiting for me when I arrived, barefoot in pajamas, holding a glass of water in one hand and a folded blanket in the other. She didn't say, "What happened?" She didn't say, "Are you okay?" She just opened the door and stepped aside. That's love. I sat down on her old couch, pulled my coat off slowly, and let my body finally rest into something soft. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me the blanket and said, "You look like someone who did the hardest thing and lived through it." I said, "I left him." She nodded. I said, "In front of everyone." She nodded again. I said, "I didn't ask for anything." And she said, "Because you already gave everything." I closed my eyes then, not because I was tired, though I was, but because I needed a moment of silence that wasn't laced with guilt. A moment of stillness where I wasn't being measured for compliance. A moment where my own breath didn't sound like a countdown. And in that silence, I saw it. Not a memory, not a flashback, but a truth. That I had spent years confusing resilience with silence. That I had mistaken loyalty for servitude. That I had given kindness to someone who saw it as currency and not as a sacred offering. But no more. That woman, the one who begged quietly, who bartered dignity for peace, who endured, because it was easier than explaining why she deserved more, she was gone. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened the folder of screenshots I had collected for months. The ones I kept telling myself I'd never need. The ones that proved what I had endured, what I had forgiven, what I had survived. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to anymore. I just moved them to a new folder titled Evidence, Not Excuses. Because the next chapter wouldn't be whispered in therapy offices or sobbed into wine glasses with friends who meant well but didn't understand. The next chapter would be mine. Written loudly. Lived freely. And built on the ashes of a silence I had finally set on fire. It didn't begin with strategy or planning or even any particular moment of clarity. I simply opened my phone one late evening and started typing. I wasn't trying to write anything poetic or articulate or carefully measured to generate sympathy from strangers who knew nothing about me or my story. I wasn't seeking revenge or exposure, and I certainly wasn't hoping to trigger controversy or set fire to anyone else's curated illusion of domestic peace. I was just trying to survive another night of quiet, the kind that fills your ears with old wounds and demands you listen to them completely. So I wrote what I remembered. The tablecloth that scratched against my thighs at that wedding, the clink of silverware, the way my heart stalled. I wrote how it felt when he slapped my hand away like I was some eager intern forgetting the rules of proximity and discretion. I wrote the exact words he said, how his voice dropped just low enough that no one else could hear the impact but me and him. I described the moment I stood in front of that room, microphone in hand, no notes, no plan. Just truth sharpening inside my throat like steel. And I posted it, not to my usual profile, not with any identifying photos, not even with hashtags or disclaimers, just raw and standing on its own. Then I turned off my phone and went to sleep, my body still recovering from months of stress, my spine learning how to stand again. I didn't check notifications the next morning because I didn't expect any. I wasn't sure I even wanted anyone else to read what I wrote. But by the time I finished making tea and wandered back to the couch where I'd been staying, I saw the screen already glowing with light. The post had spread not like wildfire, not with fury, but with the slow and certain reach of something that had been waiting to be seen. There were hundreds of responses by then, each one longer than the last, each one from women who sounded like me, hurt like me, survived like me. Some spoke in metaphors, some in direct quotes, some in broken sentences that clearly took everything they had left to type and send into the world. They didn't want attention or admiration or even advice. They just wanted someone to finally say, "Yes, that happened to me, and no, it wasn't normal." Reading their stories was like walking barefoot across glass and realizing that every shard matched a wound I'd long ago decided not to acknowledge anymore. One woman wrote, "He called me disposable and then handed me flowers like it canceled out what he'd already planted inside my sense of self." Another typed, "I kept apologizing for needing comfort until I realized he only ever wanted me when I was perfectly quiet and perfectly convenient." And with every word I read, something dormant inside me rose, not just empathy or rage, but a clarity I hadn't known I was capable of holding. I had spent months thinking I was the only one trying to parent a child while mothering my own neglected, silenced, unclaimed inner life at once. But I wasn't alone, and now I knew it with more certainty than anything he had ever promised or she had ever complimented out of performance. I didn't post again that day. I didn't need to. Their stories had already spoken the second half of mine, every one of them filling in the gaps I hadn't found the breath to write. I spent the afternoon replying where I could, not with advice or prescriptions, but with acknowledgement, simple recognition that what they endured was real and not imagined. Later that week, I posted again, this time not a retelling of pain, but a declaration of something I hadn't felt in years, grounded, quiet power. I wrote, "Today I remembered I'm not just someone's aftermath. I am my own origin story, and I get to write the rest with fire." That line was reshared thousands of times, not because it was profound or elegant, but because it gave shape to a freedom many hadn't yet claimed. Women began sending me updates, photos of blank journals filled for the first time in years, screenshots of therapists contacted, suitcases packed, apartments applied for in secret. I cried when I saw them, not from sadness or nostalgia or pity, but from the overwhelming honor of witnessing someone else choosing themselves without apology. I wasn't a hero to them. I was a mirror. And being that, a mirror without distortion, without guilt, without the need to minimize what was done to us, felt like the most sacred thing I'd ever become. Even my sister, who had known me longer than anyone else still in my life, said one night, "You're breathing differently now, like your lungs are yours again." We were sitting on the couch, baby clothes folded beside us, the sound of wind against the windows a gentle reminder that life still moved outside us. I looked at her and said, "I think for the first time in my life, I know what it means to be whole." And I meant it not in a romanticized way, not like I'd been magically healed, but like someone who had finally climbed out of the well and seen daylight. I was not done healing, but I was done hiding, and that made all the difference. The baby came 2 weeks later, early, but healthy, fierce from the start, eyes like fire and fists already clenched like they'd been born into rebellion. I named her after my grandmother, the one who raised 4 children with nothing but a spine of steel and a voice that could calm riots. In the hospital, when the nurse handed her to me, I didn't cry from fear or overwhelm. I held her like a vow I had already fulfilled. She was not my redemption. She was my continuation. And when she cried for the first time, it didn't sound like a wail. It sounded like a beginning.